Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to join you once again, and I just want to be on the record as saying this. I always look forward to these briefings with you. So this morning, I joined General Lori Robinson to update the Senate Armed Services Committee on our respective efforts to defend the homeland. Since I last spoke to the committee, Southcom has had a very eventful year. We're working closely with our partners across the United States government and the region to address threat networks. These threat networks undermine regional stability and security. At Southcom, we've made countering those threat networks our #1 focus area, and we've redoubled our cooperation with interagency and international partners to detect criminals or extremists. We're examining new capabilities and technologies to help law enforcement target their predatory and menacing activities in the places and in the spaces where those networks are present. Our second focus area, rapidly responding to crises or to contingencies, was tested by Hurricane Matthew in October and more recently by the floods in Peru. And I believe you're aware today was the first flights provided by a pair of our C-130s flying out of Peru to help provide humanitarian supplies from Lima up to the hardest hit areas in northern Peru. Today is also the day that a Navy P-8 aircraft deployed from Jacksonville, Florida, down to Uruguay to join an international effort in search of the Republic of Korea vessel, the Stella Daisy. Our third focus area, to be partner of choice in this region, reflects the importance that we place in security cooperation. It reflects the importance that we place on building trust and on developing strong ties with equal and respected partners who share our desire for a safe hemisphere and our commitment to working collaboratively towards a common goal. We look to the future, and as we look to the future, we will continue to explore new and creative ideas to deepen our dialogue with partners and to learn from their expertise, from their experiences, and to gain their perspectives. We want this future to reflect the strength of our relationships with defense and security partners, because that's the best approach for our command, for our country, and for this important region. So what I'd like to do now is yield the rest of the time available, and I look forward to addressing your questions. Dina. Lita, I'm sorry. Lita.
Admiral, first, thank you, and if you could pass along how much you enjoy these to your other compatriots, we would appreciate that. I wanted to just follow up on some of your comments that you made to the AP earlier and that you talked about this morning on ISIS. You talked about the threat in Trinidad and Tobago. Have you seen any movement back into the region? You talked about movement out. Have you seen any movement back into the region? And can you just discuss efforts of collecting intel in that area with your already constrained resources? How does that look for you?
So I know you'll appreciate, we won't discuss the way that we gather information and certainly any of the operations that we engage in from the podium. We're watching closely, and that is one of the risks that we are all mindful of, particularly as the coalition forces are enjoying greater and greater success in Iraq and Afghanistan, is to look for that backflow of ISIS individuals back to their home nations all around the world. So we're watching for it closely. The greater danger, frankly, is self-radicalization from this message from ISIS that is being transmitted back to across this region, and as you know, as we've all seen from the attacks that occurred in Europe or the attacks that occurred here in the United States in San Bernardino and in Orlando. It's that self-radicalization that poses a very worrisome threat. My counterparts across the region, we've had these discussions at our various security conferences, and all recognize that radicalization is a phenomenon that can occur in any of their countries.
Just as a follow-up, have you seen this move to any other of the islands in the region, and which ones, in addition to Trinidad?
I would say the answer is yes, we have to a number of them, and I would prefer not to discuss the specific ones in this forum.
If I could ask you about Venezuela and the political instability there, how concerned are you about that, and how is that affecting your AOR generally?
Well, the entire region obviously is watching very closely. You've seen from the recent activities by the Organization of American States the degree of interest that's been expressed. The other, I think, challenge that we have obviously is we watch as the economic situation continues to grow worse and worse and worse. And so it's an item that I think worries the entire region. The other challenge that we have, obviously, and you all are very, very aware, anytime I open my mouth and utter the word Venezuela, tomorrow morning there will be stories in the Caracas newspapers that will talk about how I'm planning the invasion of Venezuela. That is not true.
But the level of concern that you have, you specifically.
Just that we watch it closely because it is of concern to the entire region. Carol.
Follow up on that. You said this morning in your testimony that the deteriorating situation in Venezuela may necessitate a regional response. What do you mean by that?
I would leave that to, again, this is the activities that the OAS, the discussions, the diplomatic activities that they're engaged in. Diplomatic activities that the OAS are engaged in. Yes.
Sir, just a quick question on counter-narcotics. A couple weeks ago, it seems there was a large seizure of cocaine coming from some of the organizations in Colombia en route to Eastern Europe, moving through trafficking lines through Western and Northern Africa. It seems that there has been an uptick in that sort of movement into European markets from organizations in Colombia and elsewhere. One Colombian official mentioned that there is cooperation between Southcom, his government, and other regional governments to sort of track what is moving from your AOR into Europe and vice versa. Can you comment on that at all as far as what sort of activity you've been seeing?
I know some of you have had the opportunity to go to Key West, Florida to visit our Joint Interagency Task Force South, and it's at that headquarters that frankly is made up of the full interagency. It's a joint task force that is under Southcom command, but it's a Coast Guard 2-star, a Navy 1-star, a senior FBI officer, a senior Customs and Border Protection officer as the senior leadership, but literally all federal law enforcement agencies, intelligence community, diplomatic, as well as multinational. We've got both military and law enforcement from not just Central America, South America, Latin America, but we have partners now from Europe as well as from Australia. So we recognize these networks, these threat networks that I spoke about, are global in nature, and they connect. And so Joint Interagency Task Force South has been working very closely with counterparts over in Europe and in Africa to try to build greater awareness and understanding of where those networks operate, and then to share the information that we are able to develop with the appropriate agencies, whether it's law enforcement agencies or governments that have the authority to be able to disrupt those activities.
Outside of narcotics, though, is there any concern that men, material, messaging moving through Northern and Western Africa back into your AOR can play into this sort of self-radicalization threat that you've been talking about?
Is one of the reasons why we have shifted our focus from just looking at one of a number of illicit commodities, in the case of drugs, to a counter-threat network approach. It lets us look more strategically at the networks writ large. And it's in doing that we've been able to recognize there are networks that are engaged in smuggling people that are moving from the Middle East and Africa into South America and up through Central America and heading towards our borders. So understanding what those flows are, how those flows operate, and again, sharing that information with partner nations so that they can take advantage of opportunities to, if nothing else, to be able to send them home.
One last question, sir, on Peace Colombia. Sorry, really quickly.
It's your colleagues are the ones that are going to be upset, not me.
Just really quickly, from what I understand, it's a 3 to 5 year program to build upon the peace deal that's being reached with the FARC. Where does that stand? What kind of efforts are your organization making towards kind of getting that off the ground?
Early days, obviously. I mean, the critical element of signing the peace deal that the government of FARC secured is the first step, and so now it's the implementation of the peace deal that where there's going to be significant hard work ahead. We will continue to stand with our partners, the men and women who make up the Colombian Armed Forces and the National Police, who will be engaged in the difficult business of ensuring that peace extends to all the people of Colombia as the government gets into parts of the country that they've not had a presence in for many, many years.
Yeah, Admiral, you spoke to this somewhat this morning. The Coast Guard budget. Originally, there was a proposal for a major cut. General Kelly said last week or perhaps earlier, that probably that would not happen. But there it is up in the air in the Coast Guard budget. It's in flux. What are the implications for Southcom of a significant cut in Coast Guard budget, and particularly in terms of your efforts at interdicting the drug running?
So I'm not going to comment on any department or agency's budget at this point. But what I will say, and as I said this morning, the Coast Guard plays an absolutely critical role in U.S. Southcom's ability to execute the missions that we've been assigned. So as I mentioned, because the Navy or the U.S. Navy has been tasked to meet demand signals, higher priority demand signals in other parts of the world, the U.S. Coast Guard is shouldering the burden there. And the Coast Guard has doubled the number of cutters that they provide to Southcom over the last year, for which we are enormously appreciative, and I can't thank the Commandant enough for meeting that particular need. So we would be very, very challenged to be able to execute that piece of the mission without the Coast Guard.
How many cutters do you have now?
Right now, on average, they're going and coming probably 6 to 7 large cutters, either the medium endurance or high endurance cutters. In the back.
From Wall Street Journal. I have a quick Gitmo question. As the steward of the infrastructure and the facility there, as I understand it, can you give us, kind of update us on your assessment of the physical infrastructure, and if the president, who has signaled that he would like to fill it up, if that kind of continues, like what position is the facility in terms of absorbing more, and what improvements would have to be made?
The detention facilities are state-of-the-art, frankly, and are in good condition. What became clear was, and it was obvious to me when I went through there right after Hurricane Matthew brushed by eastern Cuba, that the accommodations, the temporary accommodations for this temporary mission, where the men and women who are charged with guarding the detainees were the deteriorated shape that they were in, and just recognizing that they were not designed to withstand hurricane force winds, and frankly are long past the date that we expected that we would be using them. And so we have. The time has come for us now, I think, to provide adequate barracks facilities for the men and women who are charged with that mission. And so that's what we're focusing on right now. Is given that this mission is continuing, we think it's time that we make the investments that frankly we've for 15 years now we basically have avoided making.
Characterize roughly what kind of a financial commitment that would be?
Not right now, because it's in a budget that has not yet been submitted. Right now, there's a small amount of money in the FY17 supplemental request for the planning, and so as we get that planning figure, we'll have a better sense. But basically, it's to provide adequate barracks and some of the other support infrastructure for the Joint Task Force that's engaged in the mission.
One final thing, would you need more personnel, do you think, or do you see more personnel needed?
That's kind of, it's a little bit speculative at this point, because right now we have the people that we need for the size of the population that we're charged with guarding. So.
Caroline Half Defense One. I want to ask about the executive order, one of them that the president signed back in February, creating a working group to study the threat from transnational organizations. I know their report isn't due out, say, for another month or so, or a little more, but do you have a sense of the progress? Have you interacted at all with them?
No, and that, the work on, I'm familiar that there is a study going on. We're not part of that study. We're kind of at the operational level, so we look forward to hearing what comes out of the study. Yeah,
are there anything specific that you would like to have come out of it?
I think that I'll just let the people engaged in the study have a free field to be able to work that one. But thanks, Carla.
Carla Batt, VOA. Good to see you again. Going back to Lita's.
Okay, I just have to acknowledge Tar Heel. An excellent job. So we got that behind us. We don't have to say anything more about the Final Four, right? We're good?
Oh, never.
Okay.
Just for the rest of you.
All right, thanks.
But going back to Lita's question on extremist groups in the area, can you give us a little more understanding into the size of this threat? You said a number of countries in the region. Can you get more specific on the number of countries we're looking at and the size of some of these cells?
Yeah, I would prefer not. At this point right now, that's one of the things that we're trying to do is gain better insight and understanding in terms of the size. So right now, I think what's important is to recognize they're there, whereas in the past, I think there was we were not aware that they were there, but as we look, as we determine, as we talk to our partners, we begin to gain greater understanding. So the important work is, we're at the front end of that important work of trying to understand. And of course, in terms of size, it does not compare at all with the size of cells in other parts of the world that we have much greater understanding of, but we've been watching those and looking at those for a much longer period of time. That's what we're asking to do is what we want to be able to do is have greater understanding and to work this problem. So, you know, I think we will get to the point where we've got that understanding and be able to share it with our leadership.
Can you give us a little ballpark? Are you looking at 5 countries? Or are you looking at a dozen countries?
Let me just say right now there are a number of countries that we're looking at. Part of this is a matter of, as you begin to look, it just takes time to develop this understanding. So, over here.
Follow up on that, sir. Thank you for doing this. Can you talk about any trends that you've been seeing with this problem? I mean, it's something that you identified last summer. Your predecessor talked about it as well. Are you seeing it increase, decrease, that kind of thing? And also, you talked about how it's self-radicalization and people perhaps returning home from having tried to get into the war zone. Do you see any indication that ISIS headquarters is actually deploying people, either from there originally or not?
Well, you've read the articles that in Dabiq that basically directs people now stop trying to come to the fight in Iraq and Afghanistan, stay home and conduct attacks there. So I would call that operational direction to individuals who might be radicalized. In terms of trends, 2 years ago, what we were looking at were people who were trying to leave and actually go and engage in the ongoing fight. That flow globally, that flow, I think you've heard some other leaders have talked about, has declined dramatically, and so now it's the what's next and the being prepared for what's next and trying to look beyond. And so it's the understanding of there may be some who tried to go, didn't make it far, came back home again. They've obviously expressed a clear intent, and so they are troubling. And so part of the challenge is to work with our partners and to help them develop their capability to be able to identify those individuals and then to be able to keep track of them, because it's a very difficult challenge.
And then separately, sir, I've heard quite a bit of concern about a sense under this new administration of emphasizing limited resources, both financially and practically, more on sort of building walls, metaphorically and actually, and less on actually going forward and addressing these threats before they get to the U.S. border. I wonder if that's a trend that you've observed as well in the few weeks under this new administration, and can you just talk about the importance of that difference?
Yeah, I think I would kind of challenge the premise a little bit. The role of all of the geographic combatant commanders is to work within the areas that we're responsible for to extend the defense of the United States. I mean, the goal has always been, we never want to fight a home game. What we're always interested in is trying to deal with security challenges as far away from home as possible. And so that really is the role of the geographic combatant commanders, is to provide the means to be able to do that. One down here and then I'll...
Can you speak to the challenges in your AO of continuing to operate under a continuing resolution? Any specifics on what Southcom looks like with the continued funding?
Let me describe it this way. In the prioritization for resources, Southcom has always been at the end of the line because of the nature of the threats in other parts of the world, and we understand that. And so our challenge is to do the very best we can with the resources that are available. a continuing resolution, and you heard the service chiefs all talk yesterday at great length about the impact that it would have on them. We depend on the services to provide forces. We have no assigned forces in U.S. Southern Command, and so anything that makes it more difficult for them to allocate forces anywhere, but especially to U.S. Southcom, is going to have a negative impact on us. So that's why the ability to have a budget to provide the predictability for the services so that they can begin to plan to meet some of the unmet demands of the various combatant commands is critically important.
Do you have any thoughts on, like, I mean, without that, what are the first missions, to really be degraded?
A million, but I probably won't discuss them here, so thank you.
Going back to some of the influence that you're seeing from extremist groups in your area. Your predecessors have testified before Congress before that there has been a presence of groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and Central South America, but mostly for fundraising purposes. Now, the groups that you're talking about, the presence that you're talking about now, does that fall along the same line, or are we looking at something different where it's more of an operational type tactic, these cells that you're tracking, you're looking at?
Sure. When my predecessors talked about Hezbollah being very active, as you well know, they've been here for decades in this theater. They have, in fact, were responsible for the 2 attacks that occurred in Argentina a couple of decades ago. What I'm talking about now are ISIS, or ISIS-inspired, ISIS-affiliated, but extremist Islamist individuals that follow the Sunni path. So that's the group that I'm talking about that's new. And what's worrisome is that the direction to them is for them to conduct attacks. They've not yet. And so it's obviously all of our responsibilities working again in very close cooperation with our U.S. partners, but more importantly with our international partners in the region to share that information that we have so that they can take the opportunity to take action before they're able to conduct an attack.
Fundraisers, they're actually looking to...
On the, we know that there was some fundraisers that supported some of the foreign fighters that traveled over. Some of that has happened, but what's of concern now are individuals who may in fact be radicalized to the point of conducting attacks. That's the danger.
So to follow up on that, is there, as far as you're able to tell, constant communication with them and Raqqa, or did they was it fire and forget? And what is the sophistication level of the cells and their technical expertise? Are you looking at a simple chemical weapons attack from them, or are they bomb makers?
And again, you're asking me to get into some of the details that I think is premature to discuss. At this point, I think we're looking at aspirational efforts and no specifics on any of the means that would be employed. Right now, what we're trying to do is identify the individuals themselves so that the countries can begin to try to pay attention to them and see what else they might be up to. Okay.
Okay, thanks for taking my question. I'm Kamal Abdi from Metro One News. My first question is on January 27th, President Trump signed an executive order on military readiness to include new ships, planes, and weapons. So what are your plans for your region? Secondly, has Secretary of Defense carried out a 30-day review on military readiness? And one on ISIS. A lot of females are joining ISIS, and they call themselves jihadi brides, and they are being recruited like through internet. So what are your counter strategies on it? And I need to...
Can I answer a couple of those first, because my memory's not that good. So obviously the services are the ones who are charged with developing the forces. We put in a request for forces, and the way the process then works is there's an allocation of forces, and we get some portion of what we have asked for. And so we will be in the receive mode for any additional forces that the services are able to generate. And with regard to readiness, we too obviously are interested in what will come out of that report, because readiness is a key to being able to provide forces to meet the request from the component or from the combatant commands. Now, with regard to female jihadists. We know in the case and has already been reported of some of the individuals who left Trinidad and Tobago, they left as whole families, and we know that some of the children of those families have been on film engaged in terrorist acts and have some pretty as the individuals committing murders in Syria. So we know that radicalization is taking place. Now, the scope of it beyond that remains to be seen, but I think, again, we all have to be very mindful as we watch the various other self-radicalized events that have occurred in other countries around the world, including our own, that this is not a phenomenon that is exclusive to one gender. It is. It has a way of being found in men and women.
Thank you.
One more question, and then
Okay.
I think I'm not supposed to do 5 parts. That was the one rule that I remember from my training. That
the current figure of U.S. troops in Afghanistan, and a quick question, son-in-law Jared Kushner just recently went to Iraq. So is there any readout of his meeting with U.S. ambassador there?
I apologize. My responsibilities are for Latin America, so Central America, South America, and the Caribbean, so I'd have to have you talk to some other folks about that one. Okay. And I'll come back to you.
A year ago, the Air Force started coordinating with Southern Command on their training flights for B-1s and B-52s to their flights over the Gulf to coordinate with interdiction of drug trafficking. How often has that been happening? Has that shown to be very effective?
Periodically, and we work with the Air Force to try to put together a package, and it's our 12th Air Force, our Air Component Command out in Tucson that has been very, very successful in working with the larger Air Force to coordinate packages of reconnaissance aircraft and aircraft that are capable of doing the, when we talk about the detect, illuminate, and disrupt piece. So a package of different types of aircrafts that may be available, generate them in a coordinated sortie over a period of a number of days. And so we've been able to do that a couple of times now. We're looking for ways that we might be able to continue those sorts of training opportunities because the Air Force gets training benefit in conducting those types of activities. The coordination that's required is beneficial for the training. The ability to identify very difficult to detect targets out at sea and then be able to conduct intercepts on those vessels is all very helpful. The biggest challenge that we have, and you're right, occasionally a low pass from a B-1 bomber can have a clarifying effect in the mind of a potential smuggler. But for the most part, the finish piece needs to be an interception platform that can put a boarding team on board of individuals with law enforcement credentials that can conduct an arrest, so that we are able to take those individuals and take them into our court system and be able to gain information from them that helps us further clarify and understand what the network is up to. So it's important pieces, but it's not the entire chain that we require in order to be able to get from detect to illuminate to disrupt. Yes.
Yeah, what would be the effects for Southcom of the border wall, if and when it happens, if it ever gets funded, wall, system of sensors, whatever it's going to be? What does this? What are the pluses and minuses for Southcom as you see it? Do you coordinate with General Robinson on how are you going to deal with this thing?
So I should let her talk to the actual physics of the land border because that's her area of responsibility. The piece that we focus on, obviously, and we try to remind folks, there is a maritime border as well through the Caribbean, and so we need to make sure that we have the means in place to be able to detect movement, in the vicinity of all of these borders, and to be able to apply technology and the means to be able to deter individuals from coming to the United States. I mean, those of you will recall that for the movement of drugs, initially the main path for the movement of drugs was through the Caribbean, up the Caribbean island chain, and into southern Florida. enormous effort was put in place to choke that down, and that squeezed it over into Central America and moving up through the isthmus. Efforts have been put in place in the Caribbean, and now the majority of the cocaine movement coming out of South America goes well out to sea in the Eastern Pacific, and then comes north and makes landfall in Mexico, Guatemala, and sometimes further to the east in that vicinity. So this is one of those, when we talk about taking a network approach, we've got to have the means to be able to apply pressure across the length and the breadth of these networks. Otherwise, you squeeze in one place, and that balloon effect that just pops out in a different area. So it'll take a holistic approach. It will take the efforts of Department of Homeland Security, obviously U.S. Northern Command, but also our partners in U.S. Pacific Command, because that's part of the area that some of these networks run through. Southcom obviously plays a role, and that we will continue to work with others.
You see the wall as a plus.
I'm not going to comment on how the wall will play out. My job is to make sure that I work as far away from the land borders of the United States as we possibly can.
Can you talk to, I believe you've expressed this in the past, the need for Southcom to become more involved with particularly the countries in Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, right, improving the situations there so that you don't have the flow.
Right. And that's, that is a program that Southcom partners primarily with U.S. Department of State, USAID, in order to work at the developmental issues and the governance issues to help those countries as they attempt to extend governance across their country so that security is established. They've got some very, very, very difficult challenges. My predecessor and the current Secretary of Homeland Security has commented on that at some length. But we recognize that dealing with the security or the insecurity problems in Central America will be a key component in reducing the push factors that cause people to flow north.
I remember reading an article relatively recently about the U.S. Army looking to procure maybe CubeSats and then possibly dispatching them to Southcom to help meet ISR needs there, or maybe exploring using commercial companies who already have them deployed. Can you talk a little bit about that? Yeah.
One of the things that we also attempt to do is advertise ourselves as a very much interested in new technologies, and the motto, try it here first. So we've been working very closely with a number of our partners in the services and in the intelligence community to be able to look at how can we take advantage of some of these new technologies that are out there. The small satellites that you talked about to give us better situational awareness on a broader scale, or one of the mechanisms, using publicly available information. I will give you an example of a particularly useful instance in the response to Hurricane Matthew. We had a very difficult time having a good understanding of the extent of the damage in the immediate passage of the hurricane as it passed the southwest corner of Haiti. And so trying to understand what would be the most important unique military capabilities that we might be able to offer to help deal with the immediate aftermath of the crisis. So taking advantage of some of this publicly available imagery that be able to see just exactly where were the areas that looked like there might be a problem, and then laying over that images that were generated from individuals taking pictures of washed out bridges, that were geotagged to a particular area, being able to build out a picture and see from both an overhead and from a ground-based level where the real immediate demands, and then understanding that was along one of the major thoroughfares to be able to move humanitarian supplies from storehouses up in Port-au-Prince out to the hardest hit areas at the southwest tip. Having that information available immediately allowed us, basically the day after the hurricane passed, we had already begun moving helicopters from our Joint Task Force Bravo in Honduras, Army helicopters as well as Marine helicopters from the seasonal special purpose MAGTF that was there, move them to the Port-au-Prince right away. By the time they landed and got themselves organized and ready to go, we already had a pretty good idea of where we were going to need to deliver humanitarian supplies, where we were going to have to supply the Haitian National Police Force that was providing some of the initial security. So we were able to move much more quickly than if we waited on getting the helicopters there, sending the helicopters out on traditional, road reconnaissance flights that you would do, and then come back and figure out how you would execute the mission. We already had a kind of a leg up on the problem. So, try it here first. I mean, we're very much interested in trying to leverage some of these new capabilities, new ideas, and as I said previously, the commitment that I provided is, we will in turn provide a meaningful operational environment and meaningful feedback on how some of these capabilities work, what's the pros, what's the cons. And at the same time, my commitment as a commander is that I'm going to do everything I can to eliminate the bureaucratic impediments to being able to bring it down and operate it in this theater, because we gain something out of it, and hopefully the person who's developing this new capability will too. Okay. All right. Over to you. Thank you all very much. I appreciate your time today. I know it's a busy day, a lot's going on that is not part of Latin America, but thanks very much for the time that you spend looking after what goes on in Southcom. We appreciate it. Thanks.